Hello and welcome to an episode of Agri Art. There's a large terrace wall garden called Bodysgallen within northern Wales. This garden was first created in the late Middle Ages and was passed down through two families, the Mostyn family and the Wine family, and has remained the case between 1600 to 1967. It is a formal garden, one of the oldest known formal gardens, relying heavily on polychromatic materials and plants. This garden seems to have been influenced by marine traders from various Mediterranean locations, especially Italy. Most of the documents and archives have been lost, but since the 80s there's been extensive work done by the then owners and the head gardener, Robert Owen. Many of the gardens are still being retained to this day, and several of the old plans for the garden, especially the fruit cultivation garden, have been rediscovered and are being recreated to perfect detail. This became known as the Arts and Garden. This is the only part of the garden that's been documented, although we can be thankful that much of the garden has retained its original look. Indeed, based on current evidence, the Bodysgallen Garden is one of the least altered gardens that exist in Wales in modern times. Much of the philosophy behind the creation of this garden lies in its location. This castle resides in the Crydyn Peninsula, which has access to the view of the Liverpool Bay and various mountains. Much of the garden design was made to accentuate these aspects. In 1991, a new obelisk based on the plans was recreated. There of course have been changes. Much of the old roses have been replaced by the dwarf Malus floribunda rose, and the new crabapple variety Red Jay was introduced into the garden as well. These plants surround the wall, which is fortified extensively, and seem to be modeled after the Deganway castles of the 13th century princes of Gwynedd. This suggests that at least one of the families had a military background. The castle also boasts a watchtower, modeled after a 13th century watchtower with a spiral staircase, and various materials from different groups from different countries, including France, Italy, and Spain, have also found within this castle. Much of this was installed in 1620 by Robert Wine, the owner of this castle. The drawing room was discovered in the 1890s, with further evidence being gathered in 1915. From this evidence we could gather, there was a medieval hall house on site in 1620, although it does not survive to this day, except for a spiral staircase. This indicates that this house might have been made of timber and eventually rotted away. In 1884, there was a movement called the Arts and Crafts Renewal, which restored much of the garden to its former glory, a movement that's still present in the modern time. In 1861, this house was owned by the 4th Earl of Abergave, Lady Augusta Mostyn, and is still in this family to this day. Bodysgallen was first owned by the Wine family, a noble family of North Wales that wielded great wealth and power during the Tudor age. Robert Wine was a great merchant who acquired a great deal of land through his successful business ventures, producing the finest surviving Elizabethan house mansion called Plas Mawr. He then sired an offspring, John Wine, who then married the daughter of another wealthy individual, Robert Salisbury. Robert Salisbury's daughter and John Wine then gave rise to Griffith Wine, increasing their influence. The Wine family gave rise to two sons, Owen Wine, who became the master of St. John's College in Cambridge in 1612, and still another that did nothing of note, except marrying another heiress, Margaret, the daughter of Richard Moyston of Bodysgallen. And so the two lines mixed together, and the Bodysgallen Hall was obtained. Hugh gave rise to Robert, the High Sheriff of Denbighshire, in 1618. Who then built up Bodysgallen during that period, but overreached himself financially in so doing. His son, Hugh II, went into politics and became a man in many offices in Wales, and was a Civil War colonel with the Royalists. He lived from 1620 to 1674. His son and heir, Robert II, sold Berfudu in 1683, and married Ellen, the heiress of Robert Wine of Plas Mawr, further merging the Wine and Molson estates. Hugh Wine II's grandson, who was also named Hugh, made a church in 1754, and his daughter bought Bodysgallen back into the family in in 1776, and the Moistine family became the dominant family, with all individuals carrying the name Moistine, and became the secondary house to that family from then on. The garden evolved over time, like all gardens do. The unique environment of the Cruduing lands and the extremely fertile soil did not escape the wine's interest, and various terraces and landmarks were developed within this household. The Renaissance aspect remains very well seen, as extensive use of box hedges remains a main focus even to this day. Many of the plants were obtained through Italy, as both families had connections with Italian government in the 1500s as both merchants, priests, diplomats, and cultural influencers. The current box plant seems to have been imported in 1829, being a creation of Lady Augusta, who recreated it from pre-existing manuscripts created by her ancestor. The lack of clarity surrounding other terraces led to different strategies to be taken to try to recreate the idea, as most of the material is now long gone. But several aspects, such as the pyramid roof gazebo, can be still found in the old paintings of 1730. Indeed, several plans still exist, although they're far from complete. The first restoration of the garden came under Lady Augusta's leadership. The ownership of both families lasted long enough to protect their gardening achievements from being smoothed away in the early landscape movement. Much of the first restoration reflects Georgian taste to a very significant degree. Much of the material was then. This house was sold in the 1860s during the financial crisis of that era, before being resold to Lady Augusta of the Moistine family in the mid-19th century. One of the resources she used to figure out how to recreate the garden was a survey by W. Jones of 1802, who took a trip to the Bodysgallen mansion and described in great detail what features existed during that time. This alongside other surveys by Newell Lyon, who surveyed the house in 1854, and a first survey by the keen gardener Colonel M.D. Hollins in 1860. This allowed for an almost complete recreation of this garden. This material included the strategy to recreate the kitchen garden and 2 wall gardens, in the same positions as the present Victorian ones in modern times. Lady Augusta utilized these resources extensively in 1884 and again in 1905, making it a home for her son, Colonel Henry Moistin. She lived until 1912, and much of the restoration of the first round occurred thanks to these surveys. The garden was forged by 15 people: Mr. Palmer, the head gardener, and 14 workers. Her son would later add many of the Jacobin terraces, the rose garden, and several Victorian-esque elements as well. The plants selected for a second plan were the double white cherry, Berberis darwinii, lilacs, rugosa, the rose cultivar Blanc de Chamberlain, Choitzora tenuta, Forsythia splendida, Genesta precox, Spartium gentium, Magnolia nudifolium, Aesculus British, a unique cultivar of Aesculus, an uncultivated specimen of Pyrus floribundus, and a great many other species. These were of course all Edwardian plants of one sort or another, and no nursery has been listed to have been the seller of these items, although they clearly had them, indicating that this material was probably lost in ancient times. During the 20th century, Colonel Mulston and his son, Levin, enjoyed quiet times in his household before being sold in 1967 as a low-key hotel. Even until the 80s, Lady Augusta's influence can still be seen, with the current owner following in her footsteps, working hard extensively to recreate that original image. This continued onward through the help of Henry Wilson, a mason, between 1993 and 1994. It is between the 1980s to mid-1990s that a second restoration took place, and that landscape seems to have been a major turning point in Wales, where many Welsh gardens are being reverted back to the classical forms of. So here, there, and back again, how the fashion line turned. Well, the book covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you really enjoyed it and think you can donate, you can do so at Buy Me a Coffee, link in the description below. Thank you for watching.